Hi there, and welcome to our weekly craft, a source for ideas, inspiration, and fun for crafters. I'm Sarah White, chief maker at ourdailycraft.com, and today I want to talk about judgmental crafters. There have been a couple of things that have popped up in my perusals of social media in the past few days related to knitting in particular, but people being judgmental of other people's choices related to their crafts. And that's not cool. It's like the short version, but there's more to it. So we'll get into that today. So I'm in slightly a different part of my office today because I'm going to talk about stash as one of the things. So I wanted to show you a little bit more of my stash cabinet, which does not hold nearly all of my stash, but it's a start and it's pretty. So here we are. I am wearing my Wave of Change by Denise Bayron again, even though I'm not technically out of sweaters. I am wearing this one today because I bought these new jeans from Target the other day, and they're like the same color as this yarn, so I thought it would be funny to wear them together today. It just happened that I'm filming this today too, so that's fine. I do have a little project over here. I'm not sure that I'm going to be working on it because I'm sort of in a key paying attention moment of it. It's a little hard to see. It's a basket, but it's got these little leaf shapes that are done in a contrasting color, and because mine are all sort of purpley, it's a little hard to see far away the difference, but I think it's cool. And this is yet another test knit, which I sort of fell into because I was scrolling Instagram and there was somebody who happened to be asking at that moment for test knitters, and I thought that this looked cool, and so I decided to say, hey, I can do that, you know, I've got yarn. And so that's actually one of the things that there's been sort of on TikTok in particular, a calling out of designers who use test knitters and don't pay them, because the vast majority of test knitting is done for free. Your payment is basically the pattern. Some designers will say, you know, you get the finished version of the project you were working on. Some will say you can have a free pattern, some other pattern, because you've already gotten and made the project that you were testing. So it's kind of nice to have a choice of some other of their designs. But most people just do, you're paid in the pattern that you helped test. And so there have been a few people who, and I don't know what brought it on exactly, that it's this moment where people are going, it's not cool to have unpaid pattern testers. And in general, this is talking about big name designers, which I would guess are mostly knitting designers. I don't know if there are crochet designers who make like thousands of dollars a month in pattern sales, but there are some knitwear designers who do, like, given by how many projects show up in Ravelry, you can extrapolate how many thousands of dollars they're making from their patterns. And the fact that they use free labor to test their patterns, I will admit, does feel kind of icky. And I have not personally done a test knit for a famous knitter, or crocheter for that matter, since I've done a crochet test as well. You know, and I feel like for up and coming designers that don't have a huge following, who aren't making huge sales, who, you know, we hope that things are getting technical editing done, but if they can't afford a technical editor, at least they're having a couple of people test each size and make sure that the numbers work and that the project actually fits them and looks good on them when they're done. And I'm okay with that. So this is where it comes into being like judgmental. Like, of course, if the designer has the means to get a pattern professionally tech edited and to pay people to test it, whether that payment comes in free yarn or, you know, cash equivalent of however much the yarn cost that they used in the design. So you could use your stash, or you could buy yarn, or you could whatever, do some combination of a cheaper yarn and get some cash too, or just outright pay people and provide yarn, would be like the pinnacle, right? So I'm going to give you this yarn that I used, and I'm going to pay you for the time that it takes to knit and the notes and the photos and things, because that's where it does get kind of infuriating, is that where it's not, especially if they're getting professionally tech edited too, where they're checking that the math works, you don't necessarily need test knitting in every size, but what the designers are doing is then they're asking for photos, which they'll share in social media, having people do projects in Ravelry and share on their own social media, then of course gets that pattern out to more people. So it's basically free advertising for them. And so that's another layer of the, like, you're making thousands of dollars a month on patterns. Not only could you pay people to test, you could pay for advertising. You don't need to get people on posting about your pattern on social media, when you could just buy an ad or do boost your own post on Instagram of you in your project. You don't need all these other people to support you in that without compensation, and that I totally get. But I also get that it's a personal choice of the tester. I have done testing, only for less than a year. I started probably last fall, and I don't, obviously that's not like all the things that I'm knitting right now. It's kind of all the things that I'm knitting, because I have 3 projects on the go right now that are all test knits, but they're also almost done. So I'll be back to knitting from patterns I bought or designing myself or whatever. But it's always a choice if you want to do test knitting, right? And who you want to test knit for. If you only want to do projects that you can do with your stash, which the majority of the projects that I've done with stash. I've bought yarn twice for test knitting, and they're projects I wanted to make anyway, right? So I see them, and it's like, when I see the call for testers, I'm like, well, I would knit that if I had to buy the pattern. I might not necessarily buy the pattern when it comes out, so it's a way for me to actually get to make that thing that I maybe wouldn't have made otherwise. But I'm not choosing to knit stuff I don't like. I'm not, and nobody's making me, it's my choice if I want to knit this thing. And it's okay with me, because I'm trying to use my stash. So if I have projects that I can use stash on, and it helps me get to know other designers, both to know their work, so if I want to buy a pattern from them later, and to know them on the internet, which is just helpful, networking. Networking's kind of a weird word on the internet, but maybe we follow each other on Instagram now, so if they see that I have a pattern release, maybe they share it, maybe they like it, maybe they don't, but and it's not, doing a test knit is not like, you shouldn't do it with the expectation that people are going to follow you because you did it or whatever. And that's true if you do it for the big people too, that might be a benefit that they say you get from test knitting from them, is that, oh, I'm going to share your pictures on my social, and I have 86 million followers. Not really, maybe 86,000, not literally 86 million followers, but that I have all these followers, and they're going to see your tag and your beautiful sweater, and they're going to want to follow you. That's not really how it works. I mean, like, in my experience, it doesn't work that way. I don't know how you get people to follow you on Instagram. I'd have more than 1,500 followers, and the vast majority of the follows I get are creepy guys. So clearly I'm not an Instagram expert, but I don't think the way to do it is to get some famous knitwear designer to tag you in one of their posts. Anyway, I digress a bit. The point of all that was, one, yes, designers who can afford it should use tech editors. They should compensate test knitters in some way besides a free pattern, but also test knitters, I don't feel like test knitters are being oppressed. Like, it's always your choice if you want to do a test knit or not. Nobody's making you do it. It is clear up front that you're not getting paid. If you're not getting paid, if you're only getting the pattern, that's made clear when you apply. It's not, no one's surprised, no one's tricked into test knitting for someone for free. So there's a part of me that goes, oh, that's just really judgmental and icky to be like, I don't understand why people test knit for free. And some people enjoy it. Like they just like the designer and want to support them, or they, like free patterns and have a lot of stash and want to knit it, and or they want to, they want to help a new designer out who can't maybe afford to do tech editing. And there's lots of reasons that people test knit, and getting paid is not currently one of them, which is not to say that it shouldn't be, but it doesn't always have to be. There are, there's a pleasure derived from knitting that doesn't have to be compensated. Like we don't have to do everything for money, I guess is my point. And don't be so judgmental of other people who have their own reasons for doing what they do and don't need you to get on TikTok and blast them about it. Somewhat related, one of the Facebook groups I'm on, and this actually happened before the test knitting thing, somebody either asked a question or made a statement. I don't remember exactly which way it was in this circumstance, but that felt judgmental to me related to stash building. So it was either the question of, why do you buy yarn when you don't have a use for it? Or I don't understand how people buy yarn without a use for it. It was either a statement or a question related to, why do you have a stash, basically, that felt a little judgmental about, like, why would you do that? That's so weird. And I may just be, projecting a tone on that, but it seemed like, why do you care why other people have a stash? If you don't want to have a stash, that's fine. But there are lots of reasons that you might want to, or even just inadvertently end up having a stash. When I first started knitting, obviously you're starting from zero, so you don't necessarily know what to buy. And maybe you're buying the yarn for whatever your first project or your practice project is going to be. But while you're in the store, you might be like, oh, well, I might want to knit something else, so I better grab, a ball of something else to practice with. Or, maybe you've got a couple of different projects in mind that you want to try, and so you're buying the yarn for both of those things. As you learn more, you will buy yarn for projects. You might buy yarn that looks nice or that's on sale while you're at the store anyway. Sometimes you buy yarn because you're traveling and you go to the yarn store, and it's like a tourism thing that you want to support the local yarn stores where you go. This can also be true at home. You want to support the local yarn store in your community. So maybe you'll go with a particular project in mind, but you'll hit the sale bin, or you see something else pretty while you're there and you're like, oh, well, I could knit a pair of socks someday. Grab a couple balls of sock yarn or whatever, because you like the fact that you have a local yarn store and you want to support them. Yarn you buy on vacation becomes like a souvenir, and then when you make something out of it, it helps you remember the trip that you were on. Or if you knit something while you're on vacation, it also reminds you. It's yarn tourism kind of a thing. But I would say often, it's not really planned. Some people, I guess, do plan, that like, I really love this yarn. Inevitably, it's going to be discontinued at some point in my life, so maybe I'll just buy a few extra balls or some in a different color just in case. Or, you need a little bit of something for color work, and then you have, 3/4 of a ball left, and so you have stash. I have worked professionally in the yarn industry, so I have had in the past companies send me yarn to review or to do projects with. I've written books, so I had companies send me yarn to do the projects that I did, or I bought yarn for projects. And I'm sure that I'm not alone as a designer in overestimating the amount of yarn that I need for a project if I'm designing it myself. And you don't want to run out and have to deal with a different dye lot, or the yarn being discontinued abruptly, or not being available when you need it in the color that you need it. So that's been a big way that my personal stash has been amplified. Or maybe like Webb's has annual sales, and so there were a couple years where I just bought stuff from Webb's because it was on sale, and I was like, oh, I could use that. And maybe I had particular projects in mind, and maybe I never ended up making that thing with that yarn, but now I've got a sweater quantity of this yarn, and so I've got stash. It happens. Stash happens, and it's not a thing to be judgmental of other people about, whether you stash or whether you don't stash. And there are a lot of things in crafting that are like that. I mean, some people are process crafters. They are just in it for the joy of making. They don't really care if they finish. Some people are monogamists when it comes to crafting. They want to do a project from start to finish and then work on something else. Some people have like a whole lot, I talked about this last week. Some people have like a whole lot of projects all at once, and that makes them happy and they're okay with it. I mean, and sometimes it's stressful, as I talked about last week. I'm a little bit like I've got too much right now, but it was my choice to do all these things, right? So, that's just the way I am. I get bored with things and I want to start something new, or I volunteer to do something and then I have a lot of things going on. And I like having a lot of things going on and a lot of projects to choose from, because if you get bored with one or you're stuck in sleeves, then you can knit something else for a little while and then go back to your sleeves, and it's fine. And when I picked up this little basket, and it's just like, I started it yesterday and I'm almost done, and it's just was like a fun little diversion for a couple of days, and then I'll go back to my other things. And some people only buy hand spun, indie dyed, organic, fancy, expensive yarns. Some people shop at Walmart for their yarn because that's what's available in their community. I think I talked about this before, but when I worked at About, I did a project that was, I think it was a Hobby Lobby yarn or something. Maybe not even. Maybe I was just talking about buying yarn at Walmart or something, but I don't remember. But somebody came in and was like, I can't believe that you are suggesting that people shop at big box stores for yarn. Shouldn't they be supporting their local yarn stores? And my reply was, yes, if they have one. I mean, this was in the early 2000s, early-ish 2000s. And, I mean, you could buy some yarn on the internet, I guess, at that point, but there wasn't the proliferation of online yarn sales that there is now. And there just weren't there. I mean, and it's still true. It's even more true now. There just weren't and aren't a lot of local yarn stores. If you live in a big city, you might still have several, less than one options, more than one option, sorry, for local yarn stores. But if you live in a small town, you might have to drive, 30 miles or more. If you're in a really rural area, it might be hours that you would have to drive to get to a local yarn store. Where I live is a town of, like 80,000 people or something. We don't have a local yarn store anymore. It closed right before COVID. The closest local yarn store is probably 30 miles away. And I should shop there, and I don't, honestly. I've never been there. Because it's like a lot of effort to go, and I can buy things, we have big box stores. We have the internet now, and I don't need a lot. Also, I don't need yarn. Let's be honest. I am working from stash, and there's a part of that doesn't feel great, because I know that I want to support local yarn makers and independent people who aren't local, who I might have to buy direct from, but I would like to support them. But then I'm also like, but I already have all this yarn. And so, the stash building can only go so far in my book. I mean, every person has to define for themselves what they're comfortable with in terms of stash. And I'm not comfortable with the level that I have right now. I feel like it's too much. It doesn't, my goal is that it will all fit. in here eventually, and it does not come anywhere close. I mean, this is not full. You can see how there's like blank space because I just took some yarn out of there for this. In fact, this giant purple ball, which was gianter before I started knitting with it, was in that spot. That's my purple spot. My purples are pretty much gone. But that's the goal, is to have this full, like comfortably full, that you can pull things out and not have the whole thing collapse. But so like that's the thing, judging whether a person has stash, how big their stash is, how much they use their stash, what they use their stash for, if it's test knitting or their own designs or buying designs from other people or whatever. I just feel like there's so much judgment in all sorts of ways. You know, the physical act of how people hold their yarn and their needles and how they make the stitches, and that's true in crochet too. I think people sometimes feel like the way they learned is the right way. And if you're making fabric that you like, you're doing it the right way. And that has been a thing that I have, tried to reinforce in everything that I do. If you like what you're doing it right. So, and that's true of like physically how you make your stitches. It's true of what yarn you use, of what patterns you use, of how you get those patterns, who you knit for, if you want to, both literally whose designs you knit, if you knit for them as in test knitting, and who you knit for in terms of gift giving or selling your work or only knitting for yourself. All of this is okay. If you like what you're doing, you are doing it right. Okay? Okay. Don't be judgmental of other people on the internet or anywhere else related to their crafts. Crafting is a good thing. We want more people to do it. We should not care how they choose to spend their time when they're doing it. That's the long version of don't be a jerk on the internet. Okay then, so that was fun and took longer than I expected, but really quickly I did want to mention that we watched The French Dispatch the other night, which is a movie. It's available on HBO Max. It's Wes Anderson. It is about a fictional magazine supplement, started as a supplement to a small town Kansas newspaper that becomes basically the New Yorker, but it's based in a small town in France called Ennui. And the movie is like vignettes, and each one is a story that's in the magazine, and it's Wes Anderson, so it's beautiful and weird, and it was a lot of fun. And we haven't watched a movie in a really long time because our daughter has been home. She hadn't had a sleepover with her grandmother since New Year's, and so it was like the first movie we've watched pretty much all year, so it was very exciting to watch, and that's a fun one. So anyway, I would love your comments on people being judgmental around crafting. And I know that it's not just knitters or crocheters, and it's not just yarn craft. I'm sure that there are people dissing other people about the sewing machine they own or what they make, you know, or what kind of soap they make or whatever, you know, or where they buy their supplies. I mean, where you buy your fabric, that's probably is a big one, right? Some people are like, you shouldn't shop at big box stores. And, you know, it's the same argument. Like, if that's what you have access to, it's still better to make your own clothes than to buy them from fast fashion places. So no judgment there. And I shop at Joann like all the time because we don't have a local fabric store either. So if you have been judged for your crafty things on the internet and want to talk about it, I'm open for hearing your stories. So that's all I've got today. I hope that you have a good crafty week, and I would love to hear what you're working on, reading, watching, etc. And I will see you next time.